dictator has been toppled. His regime is crumbling. Those calling for change have momentum on their side.
We will start a new phase, a new Egypt.
And those in power know it.
I am here because I get my legitimacy from you.
Can Egypt lead once again? Will the West learn to adjust? The future of this country hangs in the balance. This is Empire. Hello and welcome to Empire. I am Marwan Bishara. For most Egyptians, in the beginning was Mubarak, and the rule was with Mubarak. Through him, things were done, and without him, nothing was done that was done. My guests, however, knew more than just Mubarak. They've lived through Nasser and were even jailed during the Sadat and Mubarak eras. Seasoned intellectuals and unrelenting militants for change. Novelist, doctor and teacher Nawal Saadawi, sociologist and author Sa'duddin Ibrahim, and via satellite is Doctor and Muslim Brotherhood leader Assam Al-Aryan, with whom I will discuss the unraveling revolution. Our starting point is Tahrir, Liberation Square. The epicenter of Egyptian democracy, the heart of its revolution, its national public square. Here, in the center of Cairo, where the modern Egyptian state is being created, by men and women, young and old, standing shoulder to shoulder, rooting for real and radical change.
We have a feeling that the revolution's demands have gone unrealized until now. We need retribution for the protesters that died during the revolution. We need just trials.
This success didn't end with the ouster of Hosni Mubarak. His downfall was just the beginning. How did this come about so quickly? After all, anger towards the regime has been simmering for years. Events reached the boiling point late last year during parliamentary elections. Hailed by the regime as democratic, dismissed by everyone else as a circus.
We were shocked to find that these weren't elections that had some fraud. They were, rather, fraud with a hint of elections.
Final results were depressingly predictable, but the arrogant regime has seriously miscalculated the mood of the people.
We're here to educate people that we have to defend our rights. We have to stand up to any violations.
A week after Mubarak was ousted, his inner circle began to crumble. Former Interior Minister Habib Al-Adli, former Housing Minister Ahmed Moghrabi, and former Tourism Minister Zuhair Garana, major players in the regime, placed under arrest. Already, Al-Adli has been sentenced to 12 years in the first of the trials against him. And the list doesn't stop there. Dozens of leaders in politics and business are now behind bars. The new Prime Minister, handpicked by the military, yet seen as a Mubarak lackey, was forced out. Replaced by Issam Sharaf, who went immediately to Tahrir Square to be with the people, surrounding himself with opposition figures, including leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood, sending a deliberate and powerful message.
I am here because I get my legitimacy from you.
Maintaining this momentum, protesters then raided offices belonging to the dreaded State Security Intelligence Branch. Over the decades, allegations of widespread torture were commonplace. The next to fall was the patently undemocratic parliament. It was simply dissolved. Crucially, military spokesmen announced plans to remain in power only as long as it would take to hold free and fair elections.
We are looking forward to the peaceful handover of power within the free democratic system, which allows an elected civilian authority to rule the country.
To back that up, a constitutional referendum was held in March. Nearly 80% of the Egyptian people voted to completely overhaul the political system, and for the first time, their votes counted. On the 16th of April, the National Democratic Party was dismantled.
Today's decision was important because it meets the demands of the revolution and essentially finishes off the Mubarak regime, following decisions by the military to dissolve parliament.
Now, many of the old NDP officials and their backers, some of the most powerful people in the country, have joined the ranks of common criminals. By late May, Mubarak and his sons were at last ordered to stand trial. But there are many now who worry the pace of reform is beginning to slip. Debates are already raging about a new constitution and the role of the presidency. Perhaps most important of all, the future of the military remains unresolved, as its privileges remain intact. Will the Supreme Council hand power to civilians and simply return to the barracks? And will the pluralism that defined the revolution become the foundations of the new Egypt? Dr. Saadawi, Nawal, it's been 5 months.
Yes.
The revolution has come a long way. Where are we, do you think? In the middle, in the beginning?
We are in the beginning. The very beginning.
And what do you think, how are we going to go now to the next phase?
It depends on the power of the people. You know, the whole question is balance of power. The power of millions, united millions, and the power of the military, the power of the government, some share of government, the power of America, Israel, Saudi Arabia, you know, external powers also supporting the old regime. But because the power of the millions is greater than all these powers, that's why we are winning. So it's a matter of power.
Yes. And it's a matter of time for the revolution then to achieve its objectives?
It takes time. It takes time, and also to keep the power of the people going on. Not to go back to our homes, but to keep the millions in Tahrir Square, in streets, in Suez, in Iskandariyah, everywhere. There is no alternative.
Dr. Saadi Ibrahim, Dr. Saadawi spoke about also Islam Sharaf's government. Yes. Do you think it's inhibited? Do you think it has the authority today to effect change and reform?
It has some authority derived from two sources. One, the Supreme Military Council, which brought it in, and the Supreme Military Council itself was delegated power by the old regime. When Hosni Mubarak was forced to step down, he delegated the Supreme Military Council, which he had appointed himself. So they were handpicked, and that probably explains the way they are treating him with, shall we say, kindness, mercy. So you have still the old regime hasn't completely disappeared.
So you actually think that maybe Mubarak is gone from the scene, but the Mubarak regime persists?
Sure. That is a consensus of every observer, that the Mubarak regime, represented by the remnants of the NDP, the old ruling party, even though it was dissolved officially, but the cadres and the bases of that party still spread all over the country.
Yes.
And you have the youth that is power, but not organized. They are not yet organized. And then you have the Muslim Brother and the Islamists, because not just the Muslim Brothers, but all of a sudden we were kind of surprised by a new force that appeared out of nowhere called the Salafis. Yeah. So we have all of these forces at work. And I think in the next few months we will see contention between all of these until we have our first election, and then things will begin to settle. It will take probably a year. All the revolution took time before the French Revolution took 18 years before they accomplish
Yes.
the slogans they raised initially. The Iran Revolution took nearly 20 years. And
So you're optimistic that we're on the right track in Egypt?
we are on the right track, but it's going to be a lot of bumpy road.
Dr. Aryan, so as we were speaking, it's been 5 months. Are you optimistic about the pace of change in the revolution?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Yes, I am very optimistic because this revolution was a surprise even for the people who were behind it and planning for it. And it was a surprise even for the military and for the whole population and the region. And there was a shock abroad in America and Europe about this revolution. So now the people who are against the revolution want to put obstacles in our way. But the power of the people cannot be overcome. The challenges is great. We are still in the start, but we are on the right way to have a new parliament, a new constitution, a new cabinet, elected cabinet, and a new president.
But before we get to the parliament and the constitutions, here Dr. Sa'ad-Din Ibrahim was arguing that the presence of the military council, the way it's been running, almost have so much authority with the government, that maybe Mubarak has left, but the remnants, or actually the presence of the Mubarak regimes, is still strong in Egypt.
Yes, because Mubarak regime lasts for 30 years, and it was a continuity of Sadat and Nasser regime. So we are facing the troubles which we made during 60 years. This cannot be overcome in 6 months. And the challenge is, after building a democratic system, we can meet the demands of the people in real development, real independence, real sovereignty on our resources, restoring our stealing money, and building a new independent, free, democratic Egypt. This is the big challenge for all Egyptians now. But we must now go to the way, and we must open a dialogue with the military about the future of the role of military and the police in a democratic state. This must be open and must be discussed, but it must be discussed in the Constitutional Committee, which will make the constitution during 6 or 1 year.
Dr. Aryan, are you committed to a democratic constitution for a future Egypt?
Yes, all Egyptians are committed to a democratic constitution. All Egyptians know now that there is no future for any individual or any society without a democratic process, a real democracy, respecting all minorities, respecting women, respecting all political diversity, and this is our future now.
I would like to understand, what do you mean by a democratic country?
Democracy means...
democratic country means
yes, democracy
that men and women are equal,
frankly,
no differences, no reference to religions, no a complete secular government, complete secular state, secular family code. All people in Egypt are equal in front of the law and the constitution. And nothing is religious.
You don't think the constitution should refer to Sharia or to religion?
At all.
Dr. Sa'ad-Din, you've written that by nature, a party based on religion or race could not be democratic. Would you then not accept the Brotherhood's argument for democracy?
No, I would accept it so long as they recognize 3 things. 1, equal rights for women. 2, equal rights for non-Muslims. 3, freedom of artistic and scientific research and pursuit. If they agree to these 3...
Questions of minorities and so on and so forth.
Sure. Then, of course, they are entitled as citizens to compete for power as everybody else.
What do you think of this formula?
Democracy is democracy. Women and the men, Christians and the Muslims, all have political rights and duties. They are citizens in a state of law, in a state have rotation of power, free and fair elections, independent judiciary system, preserving human rights. All human rights are preserved, but we must respect that the people know their way. Nobody can have super priority for teaching people what they want to do, because the people are accepting the constitution or rejecting the constitution. The power of people cannot be challenged at all.
Dr. Aryan, let me take all of this to Dr. Saadawi. Are you convinced by the arguments presented by Dr. Aryan on the question of rights for all?
No, no.
Why?
Democracy means that all people equal. I am not equal in the eyes of the Muslim brothers. They do not consider me equal. It's not just because he said political democracy. Democracy is not political. Democracy starts from the home, between the husband and the wife and the children. If there is no democracy at home, in the family, there is no democracy in the parliament. So I would like to ask Dr. Aryan, if they have the power, they are going to change the family code so that the wife and the husband equal, that we have a secular family code, not a Muslim family code that a man can marry 4 wives. So we must have justice in the family, democracy in the family, in order to have justice and democracy in the state.
It is not up to me and not up to Dr. Nawal. It is up to elected parliament who represent the people. This is the rule of the parliament, who legalize and stabilize the society. And Dr. Nawal has some issues. It is up to her.
Let's take this then to Dr. Saaduddin Ibrahim. Dr. Saaduddin, what do you think the democracy for Egypt is going to mean? Is it the rule of the majority, or is it the rule of the democratic values?
Well, it is both. When I and probably others insist on basic Bill of Rights that will ensure complete equality of gender, complete equality of citizens regardless of religion and race, these are extra-constitutional. These are part of the Bill of Rights that will ensure that even if there is a rule of the majority, that the majority will be bound by these more universal principles. And that is something that the Muslim Brothers and other Islamic forces in the country have to recognize and have to assert their respect for. Otherwise, there will be always question about how sincere some of these religious-based forces are. I'm not so much worried about the Muslim Brothers who have been on the scene for 80 years, but I'm more worried about people on the right.
The rise of the Salafists.
Salafists that came out of nowhere, did not participate in the revolution, claimed for a long time that they are apolitical, they are Wahhabi-based. These are the ones that frighten any genuine Democrat. If there is any danger of hijacking the Egyptian revolution, it is from this kind of forces as much as it is for the remnants of the NDP and of the military itself.
Assam Al-Aryan, could you please answer this specific question about the rise of the Salafists who do embrace a Wahhabite interpretation of society and the rule of Sharia?
Sharia is the main guarantee for all Egyptians, because Sharia preserves all rights, equality, freedom, shura as a democracy, development, encourage people to fulfill their faith, committed to their faith. Our Christians, Egyptian Christians, are more keen about Sharia because they are keen about their family law.
Go ahead, Dr.
Yes.
Saadawi.
Democracy is not just elections or majority rule. I am a thinker. I am a novelist. I'm not a politician. Politics is the art of the possible. I am a writer, creative writer. The revolution is the art of the impossible. So let's go up to the dreams of the revolution. You know, freedom means I am free, like him. Yes. He's a doctor like me. I am a doctor like him. So let's look at that. We need a constitution that make everybody equal, number one. Then we need new laws for political parties to bring the revolution and to be represented in those political parties.
We're going to address this very particular point that you just raised after we come back from a break. But before we do that, we're going to do a bit of a balance sheet on Egypt's economic performance.
Tahrir Square came alive with calls for an end to Mubarak's rule, but also with complaints about unemployment, food price inflation and low wages. It wasn't only about the state of emergency, but also about the state of the economy. But the revolutionary demands of the working classes have yet to be met.
I understand that people are suffering, but they shouldn't think that it would have been better without the revolution.
Poverty is a core problem in Egypt, where 40% of the population lives on $2 a day or less. And following IMF policies, poorer Egyptians have seen living standards consistently eroded. So the new government has taken radical steps towards social justice. A minimum wage has been implemented. Subsidies for the poor will rise by 20%, and income tax for top earners has increased. And there's been no shortage of offers to help Egypt. The UAE pledged $3 billion for social assistance and projects to promote job growth. The G8 countries recently offered $20 billion for Egypt and Tunisia, but the small print said this was for what it deemed suitable reform efforts. American business interests were not far behind.
I'm here with a group of American industrialists who want to assure the Egyptian people that America is ready to invest in jobs and opportunity, and we continue to support their efforts for democracy and freedom.
But whilst there's much left to do, Egyptians are wary of the strings attached to some of this largesse. The finance minister recently announced that Egypt did not need the World Bank nor IMF's money and turned down a standby loan of $3 billion. Is Egypt's refusal a sign of economic sovereignty or a short-term measure designed to appeal to the protesters? In Cairo, a high-level conference attended by the military saw the presentation of a plan to achieve for Egypt the kind of transformation that Malaysia and Turkey have experienced in the last 15 years.
We were able to say no to the IMF and the World Bank. We not only have to repay the money, but we have to hand over our economy for them to manage.
If Egypt wants to become an economic tiger, it might be time for new Egyptian economic thinking with ideas from Ankara, Brasilia or Kuala Lumpur.
Welcome back. The popular committees that planted the first seeds of the Egyptian revolution a decade ago mobilized Egyptian youth on Arab issues, starting from the Palestinian Intifada in 2000 through the war in Iraq in 2003, before they and their affiliates shifted their focus to domestic issues. The Egyptian youth were as angry with the regime's management of foreign policy as they were with its management of the economy.
For 30 years, the leader of Egypt advised the good, the bad, and the ugly. But as Mubarak's hold on power began to slip, the regime was desperate to make sure he didn't seem to be on the sidelines. Images were doctored so Mubarak appeared to be front and center. But it wasn't always so. Under the pan-Arab leadership of Gamal Abdel Nasser, Egypt had maintained its position as the power center of the Arab world, a catalyst for the non-aligned movement, an inspiration to Arabs everywhere. The signing of the Camp David Accords in 1978 was the major turning point in Egyptian foreign policy. President Sadat set in motion a series of events far more complex than simply establishing peace with Israel. From the moment the deal was struck, the regime knew it was secure, backed up by billions of dollars each year from Washington. Mubarak was more than happy to follow in his predecessor's footsteps, embracing the role of Washington's favorite Arab.
I would not refer to him as a dictator.
But as quickly as the president rose to prominence in the West, Egypt's regional influence began to wane. The Arab Spring has heralded a fresh start.
We would like to have permanent, comprehensive, just peace in the area, which will include the Palestinians, the Israelis, and everyone else.
The first concrete sign of a shift in Egyptian foreign policy came less than a week after Mubarak was ousted, when the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces granted permission for 2 Iranian warships to pass through the Suez Canal.
The crossing of these ships through the Suez Canal show us that we are dealing with a new Middle East.
Israel described the move as a provocation.
Iran seeks to exploit. It is seeking to shut down the lights and create another era of darkness.
Egypt also got to work brokering a deal between the 2 warring Palestinian factions, Hamas and Fatah. Pleasing some,
today's new Egypt embraces the Palestinian reconciliation. We as Palestinians give thanks to God.
Displeasing others.
What happened today in Cairo is a tremendous blow to peace and a great victory for terrorism.
And then came relief for the people of Gaza, as Egypt eased a ban on crossing the Rafah border.
As Palestinians today, we are thankful to Egypt and thankful to the Egyptian revolution that changed the situation of complete siege and blockade on Gaza.
These moves clearly illustrate that Egypt is gradually redefining its foreign policy on its terms. So, how will Washington react to this new Egypt? For 30 years, the US has paid $2 billion annually to keep Mubarak on side, the bulk of which was used for military hardware. The generals are happy to keep the deal, but are the people happy to keep the generals? It doesn't seem as though American influence will continue to dominate for much longer. In a recent national poll, 4 out of 5 Egyptians admitted they have an unfavorable opinion of the United States. So perhaps this new Egypt is ready to lead the Arab world once again.
We will start a new phase, a new Egypt.
This time on Egyptian terms.
Joining us to broaden the discussion regarding Egypt's standing in the region and beyond is Max Rodenbeck, author and Cairo-based chief correspondent for The Economist. Max, thanks for joining us. Before I come to you, I just want to ask Dr. Saadawi about a comment she made recently when she said revolutionaries were in Tahrir Square fighting for Egyptian independence.
Yes.
Egypt is not independent?
No. We became an American colony since Sadat. We became an economic, political, cultural colony of America and Israel. And in fact, independence is not only political, it's economic, political, social, culture, everything. And especially economic, especially. Because now we have more than 45% of the Egyptians under the poverty line. This is the result of the open door policy of Sadat. We started to import and export our food. Out of 5 loaves of bread, we import from America 4. So independence means to us in the revolution that Egypt produce what we eat and eat what we produce. That's in economic independence is very important for the revolution.
Max, what do you think? What's the chances for Egypt to be economically independent?
Well, I think it's going to take some time for Egypt to really build a strong economy, which is the first precondition for a greater degree of independence. Egypt has been, to some extent, dependent on the United States, although that dependence has lessened, actually, over the last 30 years, starting from the point of Camp David, when Egypt was extremely dependent on America. It's partly a result of declining American influence in the Middle East in general. America just doesn't have the power and influence that it had.
And declining Egyptian role in general also in the region.
And perhaps partly because of Egypt's alignment with the U.S. has reduced Egypt's regional role. But at the same time, it's not as if Egypt's economy has struggled and failed. I mean, Egypt's economy has grown, but relative to other states in the region, it hasn't performed very well. I mean, other states have come up much faster, so Egypt's relative size has suffered. But I think it's simply a matter of time before Egypt regains a kind of natural role as the largest of Arab states, as a geographically pivotal country, as a culturally very influential one. All this will happen.
What do you think, Dr. Saadi Ibrahim? Egypt, as a client, so-called, of the United States, did lead to a certain diminishing of its influence in the Arab world.
Of course it has. And that's partly the challenge for any new regime, is to restore Egyptian autonomy from Western powers and to establish, again, all the pillars that will give that independence a meaning. And I think the economic grounds for that independence is very important. And I think Egypt has now both the manpower and an entrepreneurial class that could lead that independence. And I am encouraged by models in the region like Turkey that should be a role to follow. And I think Turkey over the last 40 years came from a position very similar to what Egypt is now. Yeah. And therefore we have reasons to be optimistic about an evolving role, both economically, politically, and regionally.
Dr. Aryan, you must be quite optimistic of the evolution of the Turkish model, especially with the AK party being what some like to call Islamic light party in control there, and the improvement in the economy. Would you be following on their footsteps if you get into the National Assembly?
That is a proper time to support Dr. Nawal's speech about independence. I agree with her in this point. And of course, independence means independence in all aspects of life. It is not a political only. It is in all aspects, culture, social, and economical. As for your question, I think the Turkish model is a good model for Turkish people. It can be discussed and investigated to have the main item. The main item is the political decisions which make the success in the economical aspect. This was the main factor which gave the Turkish economy the support and life again. But we have many models also all over the world. We have Malaysian one, we have Chinese one, we have Indian one, we have many. We can choose. But we are going to make our own model of success in economy because our problems are different than those people. This is very important for us. We are facing challenges in the economy and in security now.
So I guess free market, private property, and so on and so forth.
I suppose so. Yes. Yeah. I mean, I don't think that there's a modern Islamist challenge to universal economic principles that are accepted everywhere.
So they'll be adopting a liberal capitalist system?
It seems very likely, yes, with a stronger element of social justice, perhaps.
And you think that is possible without being totally in reliance on the West today?
It's very possible. It's extremely possible. But on the other hand, I think it's a bit dangerous to assume that any economic relationship with the rest has to be subordinate or reliant. I think Egypt is a pivotal country in the world, and it's to its own best interests. It should have very strong relations with Western countries, as well as with its own region, as well as with the East. I don't see that there should be any contradiction between those things.
We are inspired by other experiences, but we don't adopt the model. The revolution of Egypt was creative, unique. So we must have our creative economic policy. We live in Egypt on 4% of our land. We can develop all. It needs creativity, not to adopt Malaysia or Turkey. We are inspired by them, but we have to do our own economy on our creative mind. And also interdependence is different from dependence. I am against dependence. I'm against capitalism, harsh capitalism. We need a mixture of socialism, private property, state control. We need to look at the benefit of the majority of the people and to have social justice, equality in economy, minimum wages, and also to put a limit, a ceiling to the maximum wages. So we must look to social justice to the millions of people, and we need to use our mind.
In so many ways, Dr. Sa'ad-Din Ibrahim, Egypt is not only an influential country in the region, it's also a model for so many Arabs, and it has been over the years. And a success in Egypt will probably be quite inspiring for the rest of the Arab countries that are now in the midst of trouble. What do you think are the chances for the kind of social justice and kind of growth that we've been hearing about?
Well, I fully agree that Egypt has, for the last 200 years, been a role model for the region. And
also in bad times it was.
Well, sure.
Badly inspiring and badly.
Well, I don't know who's inspired by its bad experiences, but we know.
Certainly in the last 10 years, we've been living a lost generation of sort led by Egypt.
Lost generation, no generation is lost.
Okay.
What you saw in Tahrir Square,
yes,
these are all people under 30. Yes. So all of those guys who revolted could not be said as a lost generation. That very creative, assertive generation. But every generation asserts itself in its own way. And therefore, there is a continuity, and there are lessons to be learned, and I am optimistic.
I want to ask Dr. Saadawi and Dr. Aryan, the generation that has been leading the revolution on Tahrir Square speaks of post-ideology, speaks of a certain pluralism. That might have been good to lead the revolution, but do you think that will remain to be realistic after the revolution? In the end of the day, they will have to either be Islamist, liberal, Marxists, I don't know what.
No. I think that, because I lived with those young people, I cannot call it youth revolution. It was the revolution of all sectors in Egypt, including the old, the Middle Ages. The youth started, initiated, but 20 millions were in Tahrir Square and everywhere.
They a bit over-exaggerated the whole youth thing, didn't they?
Yes. What made a difference was that all Egypt were in the streets, not only the youth, or the Google, or the net, or the Twitter.
But they do come from different ideological trends.
Yeah, what do you mean by ideology?
Islamist, liberal, leftist.
I don't believe in this called post-ideology, because ideology means ideas. Ideas.
A world vision?
It can be socialism, it can be Islamism, Christianism, Judaism. Ideas. Political people lack creativity and creative ideas because they go, you know, in the trend. But the revolution, we are here because of the revolution.
You want revolutionary ideas?
We are here because of the revolution.
All revolutions are made by young people.
Exactly.
No revolution in history was made by middle-aged or older people. It is always a prerogative, and it's always an imperative of the young. They are the ones who take risks. Now, the rest of the population, as Nawal said, could support, could rally to them, because after all, they are the children, the grandchildren of older generation. But Egypt is no exception to the French, the British, to the Iranian. All revolutions were initiated by the young.
Dr. Aryan, some worry that perhaps since you are so well organized and that you are been there, of course, for some 80 years in Egypt, that you might even hijack this revolution with a narrower view of what Egyptian future should look like.
First of all Egyptians were in Tahrir Square. I met families in Tahrir Square. Husband, wife, daughters, sons, and maybe granddaughters and grandsons. All generations were in Tahrir Square. So there is no division between Egyptians in the revolution, and all of them forget everything about their backgrounds, poor or rich, rural.
But you are now going to go and compete in the next elections. You will go on and compete in the next elections, and that's the normal thing in a democracy.
And in the referendum, there were 19 millions of Egyptians. About 99% of them were the first time for them to go to the ballots. Now, nobody can hijack the revolution. And nobody can dare to say that he makes the revolution. revolution cannot be hijacked because it was the power of the people. This is time of coalition.
Dr. Saduddin, you think it's time for coalition? Or
well, let me
concurrence?
just make a point.
Competition.
Revolutions have been hijacked in the past. And I have two examples. One was the Russian Revolution, in which the communists, when it started in February 1917, were a tiny minority. Comes October, they move from Mensheviks to Bolsheviks, from a minor to a dominant force.
And we'll hijack it again by Stalin later on.
Sure, I mean...
And how about the Iranian Revolution?
The same thing with the Iranian Revolution. It was Mujahid Khalq, young people like Tahrir, who staged the revolution. But came the Ayatollah from Paris, from Baghdad, from everywhere, and hijacked it. So
are you worried about the Egyptian?
I am worried about the Salafis hijacking it. The Salafis who said anybody who voted against certain things should pack up their suitcases and leave the country. When you hear that kind of thing for a liberal-minded Democrat who has fought for democracy all his life, it makes me worry.
It's quite natural right after the revolution that you have this enormous diversity of expressions that come out all at once politically.
Yes.
But what strikes me about Egypt actually is the strength of the middle. I mean, it may be represented by 30 different parties, but the actual middle, the ground for consensus is very, very large, including with the Muslim Brotherhood. I mean, I find that it's actually the Egyptian center, which is, although represented by many parties, it's at the beginning of a political process, it's actually very strong. And what you'd expect after a few years is you get parties that are much more broadly representative of the Egyptian center, which agree on many of the basic issues, on the need for democracy, pluralism.
Yes, the revolution in Egypt can be hijacked by the Salafi and Muslim brothers and Islamic groups and Christian also, and America and Israel. There was not an Islamic slogan in the January Revolution. It was all dignity, justice, secular slogans. No Christian or Muslim slogan in the revolution. Then after that, we found an Islamic man, Yusuf al-Qaradawi, speaking to the people. So it can be hijacked. What I would like to go, we have to go to the power of the people, to the real power of the millions who are not Christian, not Muslims, not Jews, not anything, and they want real justice. And let's go to them.
Dr. Aryan, go ahead.
All will be represented. We have a democratic coalition. 28 parties, most of them are new parties, are in the coalition, and they agreed to have a regulation of the transitional period. Some of them can have an electoral coalition alliance and go together. No serious threats. The serious threat is from foreign interference in our domestic affairs, shifting our foreign policy towards supporting Israel and interests of others.
Don't keep throwing America and Israel like Shida. Let us concentrate on the domestic scene. What is the percentage of the Muslim brothers in that proposed coalition?
The percentage due to the coalition. If we go to the election alone, we achieve or target about 30% only.
If you confine yourself to 30%,
now
that's
come together to have a majority with us. And of course, it can be reduced. Our percent can be reduced because you have many other parties.
Sam, on the question of independence and the question of where Egypt moves ahead, just one last thought from you, Max. If Egypt does sever its relations with Israel and the Muslim Brotherhood do become a potent force in Egypt, what relations there will be with the United States?
Well, I think that that speculation is probably wrong. I mean, even under a Muslim Brotherhood-led government, it's unlikely that Egypt would actually sever its relations with Israel. I mean, Egypt's strategic relations and interests haven't changed. And in fact, with this revolution, it's remarkable how little Egypt's policy has actually changed. Some small marginal things. But Egypt has long-term interests And opinion polls in Egypt show that the average Egyptian is not against the peace treaty with Israel. They don't like Israel. They don't like Israeli policies. They reject them. They feel much more sympathy with the Palestinians, but they don't actually reject peace with Israel. The Egyptian army certainly doesn't reject that. They're not in a position to go back to a state of war. So I think it's not actually a realistic question.
You don't think post-elections, post-revolution, in the sense that in a year or two, Egypt becoming more independent will have a far more radical position on the question of its Arab neighbors, especially on the question of occupation?
I don't think necessarily. No. I think already we have seen that the power of the public opinion is certainly on the side of taking a more sympathetic attitude towards the Palestinians.
Dr. Aryan, tell us, if once you're in the National Assembly, what is it exactly that you're going to change in terms of policy towards Israel?
I think the whole people all over the world must be keen about the Palestinians, not keen about Israel. Israel have about 200 nuclear bombs, but Palestinians are now about 6 or 7 million refugees. And then democratic states are not going to rush to war at all. But democratic states in Egypt and Syria and Jordan and Lebanon will solve this old conflict between Arab and Israelis.
Gentlemen, Dr. Saadawi, thank you for joining Empire. And I will be back, perhaps on a lighter note. It is Egyptian political humor that has best portrayed Mubarak's unrelenting hold on power. Egyptians from all walks of life joked and poked at anything related to the Egyptian autocrat. Regarding the absence of a Mubarak deputy, one suggested that Egyptian leaders have generally chosen less intelligent vice presidents. Hence, Nasser chose Sadat. Sadat, in turn, chose Mubarak. And 3 decades on, Mubarak, well, was still looking. And my favorite is when his time had finally come, Mubarak's aides suggested that the president prepare a farewell speech to the people. Surprised, Mubarak asked, why? Where are the people going? Well, that's the way it goes. Write to me with your comments or visit our website. Until next time.